I think it's so important for us to really get used to the fact that we live in Australia and to learn from the people who have been here for 100,000 years and who made the night sky their storybook.
Now these are the story of what we call Gayabidji, how the dog lost his tail.
The astronomy is an area where I depend on elders and community people. This is a science area which I'm not strong in myself, and so I depend on the information from other people. But I know that down in Wathaurong country near Wurdi Yuang, the old people had a large rock formation which they had established to judge the solstice. And a mate of mine, John Morrison, did a lot of work on that, but old Reggie Abrahams was also involved, a lot of the old people, and we're studying that now because we want to find out why people wanted to know the solstice. What was the point? And I think the point is that our people were planting, harvesting food, planting food, and they needed to know about the seasons, and that was a way of judging it. So that was phenomenally interesting to me, even though I didn't personally have the science to back it up. Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people have gradually taught me that science, and I see it as a really, really important part of Australia's acceptance that we are actually on this continent, because when we look up at the night sky, we see an Australian sky, and we've been dragged kicking and screaming to this fact because Australia still clings to Greek and Roman myth, when in fact we've got Australian story in the night sky which talks about our continent. Well, most of our plants were perennial. Perennial plants, you don't need to plough them. They will grow every year and provide you with food. So they sequester carbon. So the old people didn't have a problem with carbon in those days, carbon emissions, but they were using perennial plants because it was good for the earth, because you didn't have to turn the earth over all the time. But it was an extraordinary example just the other day. I was over in Western Australia talking with Uncle Noel Nannup and people like that, and I was telling them the story of Lieutenant Grey when he came down the coast of Western Australia near the Hutt River, and he came across fields that stretched to the horizon where people had been growing yam, but they were so deeply tilled that he couldn't walk across them. And I read that in his journal. I wrote it into Dark Emu, just accepted it because it was written there. But I thought, that's a lot of work to dig so deeply that you're making it possible to walk across it or ride a horse across it. And then a lady I was talking to said, you know why it was dug that deep? She said, because Dioscorea hastifolia, the yam that the old people grow over there, she said, its tubers are 1.5 metres in the soil, deep in the soil. So that's why they were digging these deep holes, to get the tubers. So the whole field had these massive holes in it, and they must have dug those holes progressively year after year from one side of that field to the other, and then they'd start and come back the other way. And white fellas said, oh yeah, great, we'll grow this thing. So they put in a big paddock of this hastifolia, and then they got at the end of the season, they got their harvester and took it across the field, and they didn't bring up one yam. Then they thought, oh, it must be a bit deeper than that. So then they put in a chisel plough, went right across the paddock, didn't bring up one yam. Then they brought in an excavator, thumping bloody big machine, dig down, there's all the yam. The old people knew that. What about asking a black man? You know, black woman in this case. Why not ask the Aboriginal people for their view of science, agricultural science? They'll tell you where that yam is. And that was a beautiful example to me, that this woman hadn't even been to school, and she could tell all those scientists, those agricultural scientists, who must have spent $1 million on that project. She said, hey, they're down there, 1.5 metres. Try digging. And because that's what the old people did. And in doing that digging, they improved the soil. And Australians don't know anything about that kind of agriculture, but we will learn because there's so much goodness in those products, and they're Australian. You know, we don't have to overwater them, we don't have to fertilise them, we don't have to use pesticides. They're Australian, they're used to Australia. Why we never use them, I don't know. Just pig ignorance and belligerence and not wanting to take the word of a black man. Don't know why, but we didn't. Well, most of our stories are about sharing food, sharing land, and there's one story that we're investigating at the moment about the whale, and I can't go into it too deeply because there's some stuff that I can't talk about, but basically when the seas rose and drowned what is now Bass Strait, that cut Tasmania off from the rest of Australia. But there's a story about that, carved into the rocks in both Tasmania and mainland Australia, around here in Sydney. You know, there's sites after sites after sites, something like 20,000 sites, talking about that period of time when the people east of Sydney lost 25 kilometres of land, virtually a nation, and they had to retreat away from the water, meet the people whose land they were then going to have to live on, and negotiate that new land arrangement, which our people did. Those old geniuses, they negotiated that without warfare, but then the people had to learn a new way of eating, new foods, new sharing arrangements. But the fact that they were able to do that is the thing that fascinates me. The fact that people went from eating plains food, because that was that shelf that goes out to the continental shelf, they went from eating that tucker to eating a different food, and that affected their culture, and they had to negotiate that with their neighbours. And that story, I can't tell you all the detail of it, but it's so powerful. And I just think it's not a story just about food. It's not just about the whale. It's about the law, about how strong the law is and how insistent the law is on, you have a disagreement with someone, talk it through. You don't fight, you talk it through. And the old people had that knowledge that they were human and that humans can be nasty and vicious and fight each other, but the only way to go forward and to respect the Mother Earth is for humans to cooperate, and so that for the sake of the Mother, not for the sake of each other, for the sake of the Mother. And it's a magnificent yarn, and the people who chose to think of the Earth that way have set an example for the world, because look at how we fight each other over an idea, not over food, over a bloody idea now around the world. And these old people knew that humans were capable of fighting over an idea and said, well, let's get together and get that idea straight. They were mighty people. We have to respect the old people and the culture, and we can't just look at plants as plants and art as art and song as song. It's all one thing. And I think it's very important for us when we're starting to grow the old foods, like we are now. People are demanding them. People are going to pay money for them. They're going to become commonplace in the Australian diet soon. But we have to explain to people, well, there's a story behind that food. You can't you can't eat our food if you can't swallow the history. So when we're selling this food to Australia, we also have to give the story, behind it, and what it means for our people. Like with the Victorian yam, Murnong, Microceros lanceolata, it has 3 tubers. One's the mother, one's the baby, and one's the grandmother. The grandmother dies, the mother takes over to become the grandmother, the child takes over to become the mother, then there's a new child. And it's a story that's told in the stars as well. And this is about perpetual life and how you have to care for that life. The grandmother cares for the mother cares for the child, and eventually the grandmother passes away. The mother takes her place. It's a story about life, and there it is with the food. And our people looked at the food, learnt the story, and told that story to their children so that they would understand how to look after the plant. Because that plant has been domesticated by Aboriginal people for probably 50,000 years or more, and so there's a long association with it. And the way to maintain that and to look after it is to tell the story. You can't take all 3 tubers, that was the story. You have to take the new one. You know, let the mother become the grandmother. Wait until there's another young one. Take the young one. Let the cycle keep on going. And that's how our people worked. They were working with Mother Nature, Mother Earth. And no, I just hope we have time for the rest of Australia to respect the mother like Aboriginal people do.